Honorable Minister Shri Kiren Rijiju, organizers of this event, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I wish to compliment the organizers for having conceptualized this very important event, which in my view brings center stage a very critical frontier which has remained neglected over decades because of one reason or the other, and deserves its space in the national mainstream discussion, which of late the correctives have been applied and that has started getting amended to an extent, and events of this nature I think serve a very useful purpose in that direction. Having looked at the list of participants, I realize that there are representatives from senior leadership positions, not only from the hospitality and tourism industry, but from many other sectors, which leads me to believe that they are here to be partners in the Andaman's growth story. And in a manner of speaking, to that end, I think this conclave is a potential investors meet, not only for them to bring in investments into the island, which we certainly hope they do, but to become invested in the idea of getting Andaman its rightful place in the national mainstream discourse. Now coming to the strategic geographic aspect, I believe some of this has been discussed, but it's a blessing of geography that we occupy the space that we do, dominating the state of Malacca, one of the busiest seaways of the world, through which an approximate 1 lakh ships transit every year, connecting the traffic from Indo to the Pacific. But this has to be looked at in its totality. To this we have to add the total land mass of the Andaman Islands, which not known to many citizens even, is bigger than some of our mainland states even. But there again, it is not a homogeneous mass of so many square thousand kilometers. It is 836 islands spread along the north-south axis for more than 750 kilometers. And whilst majority of them are uninhabited, not populated, but the ones on the extremities are. The northernmost one is, the southernmost one is, and the area over which your administrative reach or governance cover has to extend, because your Ujjwala gas ka cylinder has to reach the northernmost island also, even though it may have a population of just about 100 villages. Your basic Medicare or education infra has to reach the southernmost island, even though it may have a population only of 300. And that area over which your administrative reach has to extend, or the governance cover has to extend, is something like 49,000 square kilometers, bigger than half the states on the mainland, not known to many people. Another comparative perspective is that if one were asked the question as to which are the hottest island tourism destinations in the IOR, the answer would obviously be Maldives, Seychelles, Mauritius. If you add up the land areas of all those three countries, we are bigger than 4 times that area. Another comparison or perspective is, we have in our waters 1/3 the country's EEZ. We have in our waters 1/4 the country's coastline. So that puts into perspective the geostrategic relevance that these islands occupy, which unfortunately remained neglected over many decades, which is somewhat getting corrected now. Now, geography by itself bestows upon you an advantage, but left to itself it does not turn into leverage. For it to turn into leverage of the kind that you recently saw to our west, you have to populate it. You have to populate it with infrastructure, you have to populate it with economic interests, you have to populate it with industries, and so on and so forth, which regrettably did not happen for the first 7 odd decades after independence. The correctives have been set in place, and that has started changing somewhat now. On the issue of island resilience, I think it's a bit of a mischievous propaganda to brand these islands as tsunami prone. Yes, indeed in 2004 we did have a tsunami, but I think a vast majority of our countrymen heard the word tsunami for the first time at that time, myself included. There are countries in the Pacific, Taiwan, Japan, the two Koreas, east coast of China, that have been having tsunamis ever since. We've been blessed and fortunate that after 2004, there hasn't been any tsunami here at all. Insofar as earthquakes are concerned, yes, we are on seismic zone 5, but there are more than 15 countries and locations which have got, in terms of frequency of earthquakes and in terms of magnitude and intensity of earthquakes, occupy a much higher scale. None of this has stopped developmental activities, creation of infrastructure in any of them. There are hardened constructions norms available, there are Building Codes of India codes available, there are National Building Construction Codes available, and you conform to that, and that does not become an impediment into your growth story at all. So I think to that extent that resilience bit is a bit of a mischievous propaganda. So like I said, for the first 7 odd decades, there was virtually no investment in infrastructure. For a territory that even at that point in time was touted as a tourist destination, there wasn't even a single 5-star hotel in the entire ANN Islands, not even one. The first 5-star came up around 2020, just before the COVID pandemic, the Taj Exotica in Suraj Dweep. These correctives have been set, I'll cover it a bit later. And therefore, things actually have started changing in the last 10, 12 years, specifically from the time on the directions of the Prime Minister, the Islands Development Agency was set up. And hereinafter, I will start talking in terms of connectivities. And to begin with, first and foremost, the road connectivity, which is the smallest segment in any case. Each island has to be self-sufficient in terms of its road network. The distance apart islands is such that you cannot have roads across islands except in the districts of North and Middle and South Andaman, where from 1970s onwards, a single-laned ATR, Andaman Trunk Route, existed. But there were 2 straits that had to be crossed, the Humphrey Strait and the Middle Strait. So vehicular traffic had to be ferried. You had to disembark onto the ferry, embark at the other end, second time again on the second strait, and therefore a 310 kilometers road travel took you something like 12 hours. Now that is being addressed. One of the straits, the bridge is already functional, state-of-the-art bridge inaugurated by the Home Minister. The second bridge is under construction. The entire project has not been well executed at all. It has seen many time overruns, it has seen cost overruns, but finally sometime next year this will be ready and handed over, and then this 320 kilometer stretch one would be able to cover in less than half the time that it takes currently. It will become double-laned, of course. Next is the digital connectivity. In IDA, we identified that this is the biggest weak area. At that point in time, the total bandwidth available in the islands was of the order of 3.2 Gbps, which essentially meant that on your WhatsApp, you could get a text message across most of the time. You could get a still picture across evenings, mornings, when the network load was minimal. If you took a 5-second video, you would keep seeing that circle going round and round till you came to a mainland airport of Chennai or Visakhapatnam or something. Those of you who visited these islands before 2020 and have visited it since would see the stark difference. So this was identified by us as the first aspect that needs to be addressed, without which neither tourism nor strategic infra, not becoming a strategic hub of any nature, was going to be possible. 2-year project. December 2018, the Prime Minister came down here himself to lay the foundation stone. December 2018. 2-year project completed 4 months ahead of schedule, inaugurated by the Prime Minister in August 2020. 2,600 kilometers of subsea underwater OFC, from Chennai to Srivijayapuram, and from Srivijayapuram to the outermost islands, which brought up the bandwidth from Chennai to Srivijayapuram sector to 200 Gbps, almost a 200-fold increase, and from Srivijayapuram to the outermost islands to 100 Gbps, and the cables have spare cores which are left untapped currently, and this will meet all our network requirements, I would venture to say, for the next 100 years. And with that, apart from ease of doing business and everything else, we should be able to get onto the islands IT and telecom enabled industries as well. Future plans also cater for redundancy, because right now this is the only link we have. The fallback option again goes back to the satellite beamed connectivity of the order of 3, 4, 5 Gbps. And therefore a proposal is under consideration for a Puri or Machilipatnam to Diglipur OFC, but more about it later. With that, I come to air connectivity and aviation infrastructure. Srivijayapuram Airport, all of you would have seen it, state of the art, comparable to any airport anywhere in the world. Came up in 2023, and what passed for an airport prior to that is visible to you across the GOAT as you leave, which was the height of connectivity thing in a capital of a union territory, in a tourism hub till 3 years ago. For an entire season, we operated non-stop international flights from Kuala Lumpur. The last season, it did not operate for many, many reasons. We are hopeful for reviving this and additional direct international air connectivities this end of monsoon onwards. This is insofar as the terminal is concerned, but insofar as the runway, there are many, many limitations. It has operations only from the southwestern end. The northeastern end has a Joggers Park hillock obstruction. Besides, there are many other obstructions, and therefore we have proposed a brand new greenfield airport at Srivijayapuram, some 4 to 5 kilometers south of the current location. After several site visits by Airports Authority of India, final site selection has been done. Land has been identified. LIDAR survey has been done. Currently, the consultant appointment of consultant process is in motion. And the proposal we have made is that this should be executed on the PPP mode, like the MOPA of Goa or Jawar of Greater Noida, because the customs and immigration, such facilities already exist here, and the tourism is on the growth. The concept has, in the final scheme of things, 2 runways like Singapore's Changi, 1 PTT, 1 parallel taxi track. So in effect, 3 runways in the final run. To begin with, of course, it will start operations with 1 3-kilometer runway, dual end operations. Another new greenfield airport, you would have read about it, it's recently been in the news, is at GNI. Similar, the original concept and drawings include 2 runways and 1 PTT, both end operations. This will be a dual use airport, all approvals granted. Airport Authority of India has already floated out a RFP for a consultant in this. We expect the first phase to be ready, which will have only 1 runway. The first phase will have only 1 runway in about 5 years, in less than 5 years' time from the date of a contract being awarded. Apart from this, existing runway extensions in INS Baz in GNI and in INS Kohasa in Diglipur are also underway. In Diglipur, all land allotments have been done except for one small parcel of private land that is to be acquired, but that is for ancillary facilities, not for extension of runway. So, in effect, going forward, along this 750 kilometer stretch of on the north-south axis, we'll have 4 full-length day and night runways: Diglipur, Sri Vijayapuram, Car Nicobar, Great GNI, all of them roughly 250 kilometers apart. In terms of flying time, roughly 25 minutes apart. So every 25 minutes of flying time, you will have a full-length day and night runway. And given the location of these islands where we sit, this is a immense capability, the significance of which those who have strategic thinking in this will readily hoist. All 4 are going to be dual use. Udan flights have not yet started. Operator selection is going on. They can start any time. I think some of them will start soon as this monsoon gets over. Helicopters, hitherto our Pawan Hans fleet had those old Dolphin N3 more variant of helicopters which have a passenger capacity of 5 or 6. 75% were taken over by the administration itself, and then patient load and this that. The tourists never got to see the insides of this helicopter. We put a proposal for larger capacity helicopters. 2 12-seater Sikorsky aircraft have already arrived. Helicopters have already arrived. To induct them into the Pawan Hans fleet, the codal formalities are going on, but the interim they are flying for Oil India, about which I will refer somewhat later. Apart from that, we have floated an expression of interest for private helicopter operators to come in. I am told 7 bids have been received. They are under process. So the intention is to expand the helicopter fleet also for inter-island mobility. Seaplanes. Historically, very few of you would know that Andamans has the longest historical experience of operation of seaplanes. During the Japanese occupation 1942 to 46, fleet of seaplanes used to be anchored in Sri Vijayapuram harbor of different variants. Subsequent years, the administration owned a seaplane which after a while met with an accident, is currently on display in Marina. Those who have driven past the flag point would have seen it. Subsequent to that, we the administration chartered an aircraft, I think from Australia. It ran its entire charter duration, but for whatever reasons at that point in time it was not renewed. Recently, trials in 4 locations have been completed: Sri Vijayapuram, Swaraj-Dweep, Shahid-Dweep, Long Island, Diglipur. And the water segment is lagging behind, but I think after the monsoons, we will have these seaplanes in operation service. The operator, outfit called Meh Air, has already been issued the LOI by Ministry of Civil Aviation. Going forward, currently the largest seaplane operator in the world is reported to be Maldives, operating some 120 seaplanes, all of them on charter, not one of them owned by the government of Maldives. These are for inter-island tourism connectivity. But comparing to what we have in comparison to Maldives, going forward, I think we have the potential of becoming the biggest seaplane operator in the world. We are any number of times bigger than Maldives. We have got any number of locations which are yet to be developed and are being developed. And therefore, our inter-island connectivity would be larger capacity helicopters. 4 airfields I have already talked to you about operating Udans and seaplanes. Coming now to the ports and shipping sector, which we believe that apart from tourism, will be the biggest driver of the island's economy and our contributor to the Viksit Bharat vision of the Prime Minister. And towards that end, south to north now, International Container Transshipment Port in GNI, where my task is greatly simplified. I don't have to talk about much. There has been so much about it in the media. But just to capture the salients, PPP mode, phase 1 would have 6 million or just under 6 million TUs. Final phase, it will go up to 21 million TUs on PPP. Majority stake to be held by an Indian-owned operator with operational control, major investment to be brought in by the private party. And with that, it will be one of the top 2 or 3 container handling ports in the country. But given its geostrategic location, I feel that it has the potential of becoming one of the most important container handling port in the entire Indo-Pacific. But much will depend on who the operator is, how efficiently is the port run, because at the end of the day, it's a private entity who is operating the port. Galatia has already been declared as the 13th major port of the country. Going north from there in Sri Vijayapuram, we have executed 2 30-year memorandums of understandings with Cochin Shipyard Limited. One for upskilling of our HR component, and the other one is for upgradation of our dry docks and other hardware and infrastructure within the dockyard. Further north, Port Meadows is the country's first ship-to-ship transshipment hub, which has already been declared a customs port. We have already executed a JV with an Indo-German consortium called Matsya. Net revenue model for the administration, no expenditure by us, and we only earn annual lease rentals. Final codal formalities are being executed. It's about to be operational. Going further north in Atlanta Bay, next to Diglipur, out here there is a proposal for another deep water multi-purpose port. The pre-feasibility study has been completed by IIT Chennai. It is being steered for us on directions of Ministry of Shipping by the Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Port Trust of Kolkata, because they have the requisite expertise. Preliminary examination of IIT had said that it's a natural harbor without any great dredging and without any requirement for great, breakwaters, etc. It can offer 5 berths of 4 kilometers. But we have had that verified by other sources, and they tell us that without any problem, you will get 8 kilometers of jetty space within here, 20 to 30 meters water depth, natural depths, natural breakwaters, minimal, zero dredging. And therefore, this would again be one of the top 2 or 3 multi-purpose ports in the country alongside Paradeep and Visakhapatnam. Similarly, again on PPP mode, all the expenditure we'll only provide the basic infrastructure. All the expenditure will be done by the project proponent. So with all this, we see that we feel in the next 5 years itself, the shipping intensity in Andaman waters will go up manyfold, which brings to us an opportunity of positioning ourselves first as a ship repair hub and going forward as a ship construction hub even. And therefore, to that extent, we tasked our administration officers to do a study from open source literature of all the Bay of Bengal rim countries, because we are smack in the center of the Bay of Bengal basin. And going clockwards from Sri Lanka, omitting the east coast of India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, west coast of Thailand, west coast of Malaysia, northwest coast of Indonesia. And the team came to the conclusion that these facilities are at a very, very rudimentary level. And therefore, there is ample opportunity for us to position ourselves in this space. Detailed proposals have been worked out. They are under consideration of various ministries. Coming now to the power sector. If you take 2015 as the baseline, 90% plus was diesel generated, and 10% roughly equally distributed between hydro and solar. Unfortunately, there are no river systems in the island, so hydro would remain at that around 5% because of the, on account of that Kampong Dam. Today, 26, the diesel component has been brought down by more than 20% to under 70. Solar component has been taken up to more than 27, almost 27, and the hydro remains at 433. The next 4 years, we would have reversed it. 71% one would be solar, just under 20% will be LNG. 50 megawatt LNG power plant is already coming up in Sri Vijayapuram, and the rest between wind and one marginal component in single digits of about 6-7 odd percent would still remain diesel for emergency DG use only. Now, consequent to last year's budgetary allocation of around 20,000 crores for small modular reactors, we have made a pitch that in those islands where upscaling requirement is going to be rapid, for example in GNI, for example in Little Andaman Hud Bay, which comes up for developmental potential next. Incidentally, here I might mention to you that GNI by itself, that one island, is 1.5 times the size of Singapore. Singapore is today 6 million population. GNI today is 10,000 population. So that gives you an idea of what the potential is for responsible and sustainable development, which brings to the fore the question, what is all this fuss about? Little Andaman, Hut Bay, is 0.9 the times of Singapore. So that is the scale we are talking about, which doesn't, come out only through forums like this, and, propagation of this information will suddenly become aware of it. So onto the SMR, the small modular reactor, it is under active consideration. Several meetings have taken place, and we are very hopeful that some of our islands will perhaps benefit from this. Apart from this, HVDC link, this is the high voltage DC link with the mainland, is also under consideration. Some meetings have taken place. The outcome really is not very clear at this point in time. Maybe we won't need it with the other architecture coming up. Tourism, hospitality continues remaining alongside ports and shipping, our most important sector, which will generate revenue, employment, jobs, everything else, and plenty being done in this direction. I had mentioned that only one 5-star hotel was there. Just 2 months ago, we have awarded 4 contracts. All PPP to have gone to the Radisson Group, to have gone to a JV consortium of a group called Anantara based in Thailand, a high-end luxury hotel group. Those of you who are familiar with the hospitality industry will know that. All of these are pure revenue models for the administration. We will only provide the basic infrastructure, bijli, pani, connectivity, and so on and so forth. The rest, the concept is design, finance, build, operate. All this the project component will do, transfer at the end of the lease period. All of them clean revenue models. 4 are off the charts. The next 11 are ready for offloading, which will happen in the next couple of weeks. And all of them are spread as compared to the haphazard development hitherto of everything being in and around Sri Vijayapuram, Swarajdeep and Shahid Dweep only. These will cover from the northernmost point of the islands to the southernmost. To promote tourism, whilst all facets of tourism will be bolstered and given impetus, we have identified certain niche areas, amongst them scuba diving. And towards that end, just last month, we created 2 Guinness World Records. The one on the 2nd of May was the largest national flag underwater, 2,400 square meters, 60 by 40. 2 years of planning, 6 months of preparations, 3 months of intense practice by more than 200 divers from different fields, all of them pitching in voluntarily. The ones coming in from the dive industry actually losing money in the process, because in that time they could have been taking so many tourists for their dives. The very next day, on the 3rd of May, the tallest human stack underwater. Now, all this was not done on a whim. This was done, the trigger was there is a internationally acclaimed diver named Jacques Cousteau, a French guy, who dived all over the world. He had his own dive ship, his own diving teams, his own underwater photography teams, and everywhere he dived, he made movies and documentaries. He made a movie, Andamans, the Invisible Islands, in the mid-90s, in which he said that I have dived all over the world. There are beautiful diving sites all over. But Andamans have the most beautiful underwater habitat, the most beautiful coral ecosystem, the most beautiful marine ecosystem, and it has the greatest potential to be developed as a diving hub. So that was the trigger for this event. Alongside scuba diving, we have identified bird watching, because there are many species of birds which are only on these islands. They are not found anywhere else. There are some birds which are only on one island. They are not found on the other island. The third arena we have identified is your stargazing. And just now I think somebody mentioned orchids, so we will factor that in. So the intention basically is to, whilst we develop all facets of tourism, but within that we identify certain niche segments which nobody else has. Similarly, cruise tourism is again, this is I think in December, this ship had come in here, but this again is at this point in time underdeveloped or not yet developed area. We have to work on it and get this up to speed quite a bit. Now, before I conclude, I want to make one quick reference to 2 points, which at this time are, I think, work in progress, but depending on how they unfold, and that will all happen within the next 1 year or so, they have the potential of providing an overlay over this entire discourse that I have said over the past couple of minutes, to alter the geostrategic significance of all of this in a most unprecedented manner. And the first is the Thailand Land Bridge project. Now, all of you are familiar with the Malacca Strait Transit Strait. In fact, the entire argument is based on what the traffic through the Malacca Strait is. For many, many years, the Kras-Thamas Canal project was talked about. But because nothing happened, it, I think, got swept under the carpet and the public, discourse. Everyone lost track of it, till it has surfaced, again, not known to many, just 2 months ago. And now, instead of a canal, there is going to be a land bridge. Over on the Andaman Sea side, there will be a port coming up called Ranong. On the Gulf of Thailand side, there will be another port coming up called Chumphon. The distance apart is only 45 kilometers. There will be multi-train tracks for high-speed container movement. There will be pipelines for transfer of fuel, oil, gas, petrol, crude, whatever. There will be multi-layered road tracks. There will be air connectivity. There will be digital connectivity. And what are the implications of this for us? This is on along the 10th parallel. Now, if you extend the 10th parallel east, in 300 kilometers, you are into South China Sea. So therefore, South China Sea is now on your doorsteps, or the other way around, depending on how you look at it. Now you extend the 10th parallel westwards, and it passes smack between the Andaman group of islands and the Nicobar group of islands. So now you are not only dominating the state of Malacca, you are dominating every conceivable passage which connects the Indo to the Pacific. And all of you can visualize the significance of that, what it will bring to the table once it becomes operational. This is going to be offloaded by Thailand purely on PPP mode, including bidding by foreign countries. All of you can imagine which country will get this, and at the speed at which that country executes, as to how long will this take. The distance is, like I said, only 45 kilometers. There are agencies which, including in India, execute highways twice that length in one day. So that is the speed at which this is going to happen. The second one is offshore oil exploration. Now, for a territory that has got 1/3 the country's EEZ and 1/4 the coastline, till about 6 years ago, virtually no offshore oil exploration took place in Andaman waters. And that was on account of the entire waters around Andamans having been classified as no-go zone, because they might fall in the trajectory of missile launches from DRDO missile launches from Wheeler Island and ISRO rocket launches from Sriharikota. So we took it up very, very proactively 2018, 2019 onwards, that listen, technology now permits you to waypoint these vehicles in such a manner that they don't fly over the Andamans. So all that was extended. Entire stretches of waters were taken out of the no-go zone. Fast forward to end of last year, Oil India in SVP2, Srivijayapuram 2, struck oil, gas, 87% methane. 27th January this year, ONGC struck in AND P1, crude condensate, and just now, you would have seen the minister's tweet, Minister Hardeep Puri's tweet, on the 7th of June, in Oil India again in SVP3. Now, the auction under OALP 10 and 11, that is offshore area licensing body, essentially bidding out of blocks for oil exploration, 10 and 11. The largest ever blocks are going to be, are currently under auction, amongst which the largest are in the Andaman Basin. And the joint venture talks are going on of these oil majors. Some of the JVs are already in operation with BP, British Petroleum, ExxonMobil, Shell, Petrobras Brazil, etc. Now, why would all of them want to come there? So, this is a space that again needs to be watched, which may transform this entire region, not only the region, for the country. You would have seen the minister's sort of declarations of potentiality of going into 20 trillion GDP, of this becoming a Guyana-like point. So with that, I come to the end of my talk, and I once again compliment the organizers for having thought about this event, which I hope starts bringing these matters center stage in the national discourse. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention.